The great trade station of Drenhal was no place for the soft or the innocent. It was a floating bazaar built around the carcass of an old warship, its decks twisted into alleys filled with smoke, neon light, and the stench of too many species packed together. You could buy anything there if you had credits and no conscience: guns, slaves, outlawed tech, even strange beasts captured from forbidden worlds. Captain Jonas Cade had walked those markets many times before. He wasn't a hero, not anymore. Once he'd fought in humanity's border wars, protecting outposts against raiders, pirates, and alien militias that wanted the upstart humans pushed back into their home system. But those days had left scars, not medals. And now he worked alone, running cargo, doing odd jobs, staying alive. His ship, the Iron Dagger, wasn't pretty, but it could take a hit and bite back. Jonas wasn't looking for trouble that day. He was just moving through the noise, keeping his head low, when he noticed the traitor. A fat, sneering creature with 4 arms and yellow skin barked at passers-by from behind a rusted cage. Inside sat a figure so out of place it stopped Jonas in his tracks. She was small, thin from starvation but not fragile, with skin that shimmered faintly silver under the lamps. Her hair was pale, almost white, and her violet eyes had the look of someone who had seen too much pain. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She just sat there, still as stone, but her gaze was sharp, alive. The trader's pitch was crude. Exotic specimen. Beautiful, useless, mute. She doesn't speak, doesn't fight, can't cook. Decorative only. Lowest price you'll ever hear. People walked by without slowing. A pet that couldn't talk back had no value, especially when it was clearly half-starved. But Jonas felt a knot tighten in his gut. He had seen broken prisoners before, men and women stripped of everything by war. This was no pet. She was someone. Jonas stepped closer, and the trader grinned, smelling profit. You, human, yes. You have an eye for rare things. She's Valorian, last of her kind, or close to it. Useless but rare. Cheap for you. She can't even scream. Jonas knew the name. Valorians were a myth to most spacers now, a race destroyed by the insectoid Zeroth swarm centuries ago. They were said to be artists, singers, philosophers, and warriors who could command with their voices alone. But the girl in the cage didn't look like a legend. She looked like someone who had lost everything. Something inside Jonas snapped. Maybe it was memory of comrades left behind. Maybe it was anger at the sight of one more person treated like scrap. Or maybe it was just instinct, the stubborn human refusal to walk away. How much? Jonas asked. The trader rattled off a number, expecting haggling. Jonas paid it without a word. He had no use for her, no reason to buy her, but he did. The trader laughed as he unlocked the cage. Foolish human. She'll eat your food and do nothing else. She's mute, broken. Good luck. Jonas ignored him. He crouched as the girl stepped out, unsteady on her feet. He didn't touch her, didn't try to drag her. Instead, he simply said, no chains, no cages. Not while you're with me. For a moment, her eyes flickered. Distrust, confusion, maybe even disbelief. But she followed him, silent as shadow, and boarded his ship. That night, as the Iron Dagger prepared for departure, Jonas looked across the small galley at his strange new passenger. She sat quietly, watching the stars beyond the viewport. She didn't eat much, didn't speak at all, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there in the market. Not gratitude. No, it was fiercer than that. It was the first flicker of defiance, like a dying flame given breath. Jonas didn't know her name yet. He didn't know her story. He only knew one thing: she wasn't broken. And whatever had silenced her voice, he intended to make sure no one ever silenced her spirit again. The weeks after the auction moved like shifting shadows. Jonas didn't ask questions about the girl. He knew she wouldn't answer, not with words anyway. Instead, he watched her move around the Iron Dagger, quiet, calculating, absorbing everything. He gave her food, clothes, and space. She gave him silence and eyes that missed nothing. The trader's manifest had given her a name, Alira. It sounded delicate, but there was nothing weak about the way she carried herself. Even in silence, she was sharper than most people he had met. She examined every tool, every weapon locker, every maintenance panel as though storing the ship's heartbeat in her memory. One evening, Jonas found her in the armory. A plasma pistol lay disassembled on the bench, its parts arranged in a perfect grid. He hadn't shown her how to do that. She had just known. When he stepped in, she didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, almost daring him to scold her. Jonas only chuckled and picked up the power cell. "Good work," he said. For a second, he swore her lips twitched as though she wanted to smile. Life aboard ship followed that rhythm. Jonas teaching without words, Elira learning without asking. It was almost peaceful until the war reached them. The news arrived through panicked transmissions. Entire human colonies at the frontier were falling to the Zeroth swarm. The insectoid empire had risen again, pouring out of the void like a tide of hunger. They didn't negotiate, didn't enslave, they consumed. Planet after planet screamed for help, and humanity's young fleets could barely slow them. Jonas had fought wars before, but this was different. The Zeroth didn't stop when they met resistance. They adapted, devoured, and multiplied. Humanity was new to the galaxy, still fragile, and the swarm had chosen their weakness like predators scenting blood. The Iron Dagger intercepted more and more distress calls. Jonas patched into the comms one night and listened to a mining outpost's last words. Mothers crying, soldiers shouting, the final static as the swarm breached the walls. He switched the channel off, fists clenched. He wasn't alone in his anger. Elira had been listening. She sat across from him at the navigation table, her violet eyes burning with something more than fear. It was recognition. She knew the Zeroth. The way her fingers dug into the steel edge of the table told him enough. This wasn't just war news for her. It was personal. The next day, she surprised him. As Jonas plotted a safe course to avoid the war front, Elira reached over and tapped the star map. She dragged her finger to a cluster of dead systems at the edge of known space. Her expression was fierce, her gaze unyielding. Jonas frowned. "That's Valorian territory, isn't it? What's left of it?" She nodded once. Her hand hovered over the ruins of her homeworld as if pointing not to a memory, but to an answer. Jonas stared at her. She hadn't spoken a single word since he'd freed her, but he understood her perfectly in that moment. The swarm was destroying humans the same way they had destroyed her people, and somewhere in those ruins was something important enough that she was willing to risk going back. "You think there's something there we can use?" Jonas murmured. She didn't respond, just locked eyes with him, violet flames burning hotter. That was the first time he saw her not as a rescued prisoner, but as someone with a mission. He leaned back, weighing the risks. The Zeroth swarmed those dead systems. Flying there was suicide. But ignoring her meant abandoning the only lead they had on how to fight back. Humanity's fleets were crumbling. Retreat after retreat left them weaker. Something had to change, or Earth itself would fall. Jonas sighed and tapped the controls. The Iron Dagger's course shifted, the stars ahead tilting. "All right," he said. "We'll go." For the first time, her eyes softened. She didn't smile. She didn't thank him. But she didn't have to. Jonas felt it in the silence. They had crossed a line. From that moment on, they weren't just survivor and stranger. They were allies. As the ship jumped into hyperspace, Jonas leaned back in the captain's chair. Outside, the stars stretched into rivers of light, and in his gut, he felt the old weight of war pressing down again. Humanity was losing. But if this silent girl from a dead empire carried even a fragment of hope, Jonas was ready to follow it into hell. And by the look in Elira's eyes, hell was exactly where they were headed. The hyperspace jump spat the Iron Dagger into silence above Valor Prime. Once, this world had been the crown jewel of a proud empire. Now it looked like a wound in the galaxy. Ash clouds wrapped the planet in a gray shroud, its surface scorched with black scars that could be seen even from orbit. Cities, once gleaming with crystalline towers, now jutted like broken teeth from a corpse's jaw. Jonas adjusted the viewport. His gut tightened. He had seen war zones before, but this wasn't just destruction, it was extermination. The Zeroth had left nothing but a grave. Elira stood beside him, fists clenched, eyes locked on the planet. Her face was unreadable, but the tremor in her shoulders told Jonas this was more than memory. It was pain. She didn't look away until Jonas broke the silence. "Tell me what we're looking for down there." She didn't answer. She simply pointed, tracing across the ruined continent. Jonas sighed, but he didn't press. Words weren't her tool. Whatever she knew, it had to be worth the risk. The descent was brutal. Storms boiled across the skies, lightning crackling like claws. The iron dagger slipped through with shields straining, metal groaning against atmosphere thick with ash. Below, patrols of Zeroth ships glided like vultures over the ruins, their chitinous hulls pulsing with sickly green light. Jonas landed in the shell of an ancient city. Towers crumbled and streets split open like cracked bones. The air reeked of decay. They moved quickly, Jonas with his plasma rifle ready, Elira gliding like a ghost beside him. They encountered the first swarm drones within minutes. Tall insectoid brutes with blade limbs and clicking mandibles emerged from the rubble. Jonas opened fire, plasma bolts tearing through chitin. He moved like the soldier he once was, efficient, brutal, unrelenting. Elira, unarmed at first, darted behind him, scanning the field with sharp eyes. When a drone leapt from a broken wall, she snatched a shard of metal and drove it into its throat with unnerving precision. Jonas stared at her, startled. She met his gaze, breath steady, and pressed forward. Through alleyways and fallen halls, she led him with absolute certainty, as if she had walked these ruins 1,000 times in her mind. Finally, they reached their destination, a half-buried spire of translucent crystal jutting from the ground. Its walls shimmered faintly despite the ruin, pulsing with energy like the heartbeat of something ancient. Jonas frowned. "What the hell is this place?" Elira's hand touched the crystalline surface, her expression shifting. For the first time since he had met her, her eyes softened with something like reverence. Jonas realized this wasn't just ruins. This was a vault, a memory bank, maybe even a sanctuary. As she stepped inside, the walls lit up, glowing brighter with each step she took. Jonas followed cautiously, plasma rifle raised, but the energy wasn't hostile. It thrummed in rhythm with Elira, resonating to her presence. Inside, the chamber expanded into a cathedral of crystal. Shards rose like frozen music, humming faint notes. Jonas felt the vibration in his bones. It wasn't just sound, it was alive. Elira stood at the center, trembling. Her lips parted as if words were trying to crawl out of her throat. Jonas froze, realization dawning. This place wasn't just reacting to her presence, it was demanding her voice. Before he could say anything, the walls shuddered. Outside, screeches pierced the air. The Zeroth had found them. Drones poured into the ruins, their shrill cries echoing. Jonas sprinted to the doorway, unleashing a storm of plasma fire. He cut down the first wave, shouting back at her, "Elira! We have to go, now!" But she didn't move. She stood in the vault, shaking, clutching her throat as if something inside her was breaking free. The crystal pulsed brighter, louder, until the entire chamber thrummed like a drum of war. And then she sang. It wasn't a song of words, but of power, raw and alien. Her voice tore through the chamber, a sound so pure it felt like it split the air itself. The crystals blazed, amplifying it into a storm of resonance that surged outward. Jonas watched in stunned disbelief as the drones froze mid-charge, their chitinous bodies vibrating violently. Then, one by one, they shattered into ash, collapsing into heaps of dust. The swarm's screeches turned into silence. The song faded. Elira staggered, clutching her chest, breath ragged. For the first time, sound, true sound, had come from her lips. She whispered hoarsely, the word fragile but undeniable. "I remember." Jonas lowered his rifle slowly, staring at her. He realized the truth. This girl, mute no longer, carried a weapon her people had once wielded. A weapon that could kill the swarm not with guns or bombs, but with voice alone. And as she swayed in exhaustion, Jonas felt cold certainty settle in his gut. The galaxy had changed in that moment. Humanity was no longer powerless. The swarm had reason to fear her. The galaxy didn't stay quiet for long. Word spread across human fleets like fire in dry grass. A Valorian had spoken, and her voice had burned the swarm into dust. Soldiers whispered of it in the mess halls. Officers argued in sealed chambers. Some called it hope, others called it a dangerous myth. But the swarm? The swarm felt it. And they moved. Entire sectors fell dark as Zeroth Hive fleets changed course. They abandoned raids, abandoning easy prey to converge on a single trail. The Iron Dagger. Jonas knew they couldn't hide forever. He tried. He shifted routes through dead systems, shut down broadcasts, ran silent for weeks. But the enemy's reach was endless, and their hunger for Alira's death was absolute. It was during one of these evasions that Jonas intercepted the call from Kalos, a mining colony turned fortress. The swarm had descended in numbers too great for the local fleet. Human admirals called for every available ship to regroup. Without reinforcements, Kalos would burn, and Earth itself would be next. Jonas stared at the transmission. Alira stood behind him, silent, her violet eyes fixed on the desperate voices spilling from the speakers. She didn't need to say anything. He understood. The Iron Dagger broke cover and joined the fleet. The battle over Kalos was unlike anything Jonas had ever seen. Tens of thousands of human ships assembled, frigates, destroyers, carriers, all bristling with weapons. Arrayed against them was a tide of nightmare. Zeroth Hive ships, their hulls glistening like wet bone, swarms of drones spilling from their bellies like rivers of locusts. The void ignited in fire. Rail cannons punched holes through the first wave. Torpedoes streaked like burning comets, and plasma bursts painted the dark with violent light. But for every Zeroth ship that died, 2 more slid into the fight. Their psychic link made them a single mind, shifting formations with terrifying precision. Jonas fought in the thick of it, the Iron Dagger weaving between blasts, its cannons hammering swarm craft. He had been a soldier too long to lose his calm, but as the minutes stretched, he felt it, the line breaking. Human fleets were fracturing, commanders screaming for retreats, ships colliding in the chaos. In the hangar bay, Alira stood ready. She wasn't armed. She didn't need to be. Jonas looked back at her once, seeing the tremor in her hands, the fear beneath her calm. He asked the question with his eyes. She answered with a nod. The hangar doors opened to the void. Alira stepped forward, anchored only by the resonant amplifiers Jonas had patched into the ship. And then she let her voice loose. The sound was not sound at all, but something deeper, a resonance that bypassed steel and struck at the mind. Her song cascaded across the battlefield, amplified into a storm that rolled through the swarm. Zeroth ships screamed as their organic hulls cracked, their psychic unity fracturing into chaos. Drones clawed at each other, their hive minds splintered by the shattering chords. Human crews who had been seconds from despair lifted their heads. The song filled them too, not burning but steadying. Courage replaced panic. Where chaos had ruled, formations reformed. Where fear had broken them, resolve returned. Jonas drove the Iron Dagger straight into the opening her voice had created, tearing into swarm lines with savage precision. Around him, human ships rallied, pressing the advantage. For the first time in weeks, the swarm fell back, but victory came with cost. When the amplifiers powered down, Alira collapsed to her knees, sweat dripping, her silver skin pale as frost. Jonas rushed to her, catching her before she struck the deck. Her breath came ragged, her body trembling as though the song had drained the very life from her bones. Her voice, hoarse, broken, barely reached him. "They will not stop. They feel me now. They will come. With everything." Jonas clenched his jaw. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that they had bought time, that she could rest. But he saw the truth in her eyes. The Zeroth were not retreating in defeat. They were regrouping in rage. The Battle of Kalos became legend in the fleet. Commanders spoke of the voice that had turned despair into victory. Soldiers whispered prayers in Alira's name. But behind closed doors, human admirals grew greedy. They wanted her as a weapon, caged, controlled, deployed at their command. Jonas saw the trap forming before the words were even spoken. He refused them all. "She's not a tool," he snarled in the council chamber. "She's a person." You use her like a gun. You kill her faster. And then what? Who saves us then? The admirals glared, but none challenged him. They had seen her power. They also knew Jonas Cade well enough to realize he wouldn't bend. So the Iron Dagger left Kalos in silence, hailed by soldiers as saviors and hunted by the swarm as prey. Jonas sat alone in the cockpit that night, stars spilling past the viewport. He had fought 100 battles, but something told him this one was different. Humanity wasn't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to protect the last voice of a dead empire. And that voice had already begun to shake the stars. The swarm didn't lick its wounds. It gathered them. Scouts reported a movement so vast it seemed impossible. Hive fleets the size of small nations, converging on one target. Their destination was clear. Earth. The cradle of humanity. The symbol of its defiance. If Earth fell, every colony, every soldier, every dream would collapse with it. The United Fleet scrambled. Every warship capable of faster-than-light travel was summoned home. Civilian liners were stripped of comforts and fitted with cannons. Old relics of the border wars were pulled from their scrapyards and patched together. Humanity didn't just prepare for a battle, they prepared for their last stand. In the war councils, Jonas Cade stood apart. His reputation from Kalos had grown, and with it came suspicion. Admirals eyed him with cold calculation, whispering about the girl who could cripple the swarm with a song. They wanted her on the front lines, controlled, directed like a missile. Jonas's answer was steel. You'll get her voice when she chooses to give it. Not before. She isn't yours to command. Arguments exploded, voices sharp as knives. Some generals demanded she be taken into custody. Others warned that pressing her would only drive Jonas rogue. None dared admit the truth aloud, that without her, Earth might already be doomed. When Jonas left the chamber, he found Aelira waiting in the shadows of the corridor. She had overheard everything, but she didn't look afraid. She looked resolved. Her voice, though faint, carried a steadiness that chilled him. I will sing, she said. Jonas's chest tightened. It could kill you? Her eyes didn't waver. So could silence. The hours before the battle stretched like years. Earth's orbit became a wall of steel, ships positioned in layered rings. The moon was converted into a fortress, its surface bristling with cannons. Cities on Earth fell into blackout drills, civilians huddling in shelters while soldiers manned the skies above. Then came the dark tide. The Zeroth fleet blotted out the stars, vast, writhing organisms fused with metal, wings of bone and engines of fire. Drones poured out in rivers, filling the void like swarms of hornets. At the center loomed something larger still, the Hive Queen's vessel, a monstrosity the size of a continent, radiating psychic energy that crushed weaker minds into madness. The battle began with a scream. Human rail cannons fired, their shots ripping open the first lines of drones. Fighters screamed across the black, diving through clouds of chitinous wings. Explosions lit the darkness like 1,000 dying suns. For every swarm ship destroyed, 10 more pressed forward, their shrieks gnawing at the edges of sanity. Jonas piloted the Iron Dagger into the thickest part of the storm, weaving through collapsing ships and burning wreckage. His hands were steady, but his thoughts raced. Every alarm, every explosion drove home the truth. This was more than a battle. This was extinction waiting to happen. Behind him, Aelira braced herself against the hangar's railing, her amplifiers calibrated and waiting. Her violet eyes burned with fire, but Jonas could see the strain already etched into her face. He wanted to tell her to wait, to hold her strength back until the moment truly demanded it. But that moment came sooner than either expected. The swarm broke through the first orbital ring. Human destroyers were torn apart, their screams flooding the comms. The moon's fortress guns blasted until their barrels melted, then fell silent as Zeroth burrowed into its crust. Earth itself trembled from the impacts of orbital strikes. The Queen's psychic roar ripped through the fleets. Pilots clawed at their own faces, captains staggered in pain. Ships veered off course, colliding into each other as their crews lost control. The entire defense was unraveling. Jonas shouted over the chaos, "Now, Aelira!" She didn't hesitate. She stepped into the void of the open hangar bay, the stars burning behind her. The amplifiers caught her first note, and the galaxy itself seemed to shiver. Her song poured across the battlefield, weaving through the noise of cannons and screams. The sound carried not only destruction but defiance. Zeroth hulls cracked open, their drones spinning into frenzy. Human crews felt strength return to their limbs, focus return to their minds. They rallied, but Jonas saw the toll instantly. Every note stole something from her breath, her color, her very essence. Her silver skin dulled, her hands shook, and yet she pushed forward, louder, stronger. The fleet steadied. Human battleships drove into the heart of the swarm, railguns tearing through the Queen's Guard. Carriers launched wave after wave of fighters, emboldened by the unearthly music echoing in their ears. Still, the Queen endured. Her colossal vessel pressed forward, weapons of bone and plasma carving through entire fleets in single blasts. She screamed back against the song, her psychic shriek rattling the stars. The clash between voice and roar shook the void itself. Jonas gritted his teeth, driving the iron dagger straight toward the Queen's shadow. He knew this was no ordinary fight. It was the final gamble. And standing in the hangar, singing against the dark, Lyra shone like the last flame left in the universe. The iron dagger screamed through wreckage, engines burning beyond safety limits as Jonas hurled the ship toward the Queen's massive vessel. The void around them was chaos incarnate, human ships blazing as they made desperate final charges, Zeroth drones tearing into hulls, Earth's defense lines collapsing in fragments. But at the heart of the storm was Lyra's voice. Her song rippled through the battlefield. Light without light, sound without air. It reached deep into every human, stitching their will back together when fear threatened to drown them. Even Jonas, hardened by years of war, felt fire surge in his chest. But he also saw her weaken. Her body trembled, silver veins glowing faintly beneath her skin. Her eyes dimming as though each note drained her soul. The Zeroth Queen roared back, the psychic blast so powerful that whole ships cracked open like eggs. Her vessel loomed closer, the void warping around it, tendrils of living metal stretching outward like claws. Jonas knew they couldn't outgun her. The only way to win was to break her mind, and only Lyra could do that. Lyra. "Stop! This'll kill you!" Jonas shouted, his voice breaking across the hangar's comms. Her answer was a whisper that felt like a vow. "Better me than your world." Jonas clenched the controls until his knuckles turned white. He had promised to protect her. And now the galaxy demanded he let her burn. The iron dagger dove through a storm of plasma fire, dodging tendrils that could snap a battleship in two. Jonas threaded the ship through holes no sane pilot would even see, weaving closer to the Queen's heart. Every maneuver cost them. Armor blistered, engines coughed, alarms shrieked. Lyra stepped into the hangar's open void, tethered only by magnetic boots. Her amplifiers glowed with violent energy as she lifted her chin to the endless dark. She drew in one breath, long, shuddering final. Then she unleashed her full song. It was no longer beautiful. It was war. Her scream was a blade that cut through the swarm. Zeroth drones fell dead by the thousands, their wings folding like broken paper. Larger ships buckled, their hulls splitting into shards. The psychic storm collapsed inward as her voice struck the Queen herself. Jonas saw it, cracks forming across the monstrous vessel. The Queen's shrieks staggering, her aura flickering as though reality itself was tearing her apart. But the song was killing Lyra. Her body arched in agony, light pouring from her skin. Her voice was raw, shredding her from the inside, blood glowing silver as it ran from her mouth. Jonas left the controls, sprinting into the hangar, grabbing her trembling shoulders. "Enough! You've done it! Stop!" he begged, holding her against him. She looked at him, tears streaming in rivers of light. Her lips trembled. But she sang one final line, one note so piercing it shattered every sensor, every alarm, every barrier, and the Zeroth Queen screamed her last. The massive vessel cracked open, splitting apart like a shattered world. Psychic silence rushed into the void, and the swarm faltered. Without their queen, they turned aimless, breaking apart into chaos. Humanity's ships seized the moment, tearing through the scattered remnants with savage precision. The impossible had happened. The swarm broke. Humanity lived, but in Jonas's arms, Elira was limp. Her eyes flickered like dying stars, her lips pale. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice a ragged whisper. "You don't get to leave. Not after this. Not after saving us all." Her fingers twitched weakly, brushing his cheek. For a heartbeat, he thought it was goodbye. But then, against all reason, her voice rose again, faint, fragile, but alive. "Jonas, I spoke for you. I will keep speaking." The sound was barely more than breath, but to Jonas it was louder than the thunder of fleets. He held her as the battle died around them, the wreckage of the swarm scattering across Earth's sky. The war wasn't over. Humanity still faced 1,000 threats across the stars, but the impossible had been proven. A mute alien had sung, and her voice had saved a world. News spread faster than light. Across colonies, stations, and battlefields, her name became legend. To many, she was the voice of Earth. To others, the siren of victory. To Jonas, she was simply the woman he refused to let die. As rescue ships docked and cheers filled the comms, Jonas looked out at the ruins of the Queen's vessel. He whispered a promise not to the galaxy, but to her. "They'll remember you as a weapon, but I'll make sure they remember you as more. As the one who taught us all to listen." In that silence after the storm, with Earth still standing and the swarm in ruin, humanity learned a truth the Zeroth never understood. Machines, weapons, and numbers could conquer. But only voices, only hearts could endure. And so the legend began.